Greetings, everyone. Hi, I'm Rashid. I'm the host of the Red Pill Diaries. I'd like to first, before we go live, thank each and every one of you for giving us another hour of your time and another day out of your busy lives. Thank you so much. It's very much appreciative. I also would like to ask you to subscribe, to like, and share the video. Before we go live, which will be going in just a few seconds, to my left or my right over here, which is your left, check out all of our social media platforms. Please remember to subscribe to those and go show your support. We hope to give you a powerful show. We thank you again for giving us the opportunity to come to you and give you unfiltered, unadulterated truth. Okay? Because we know in a time where lies prevail, truth is a rare convenient, and truth is a rare commodity that we must use to get to the masses so that we can empower them with wealth, mental, spiritual, and emotional wealth, as the world that we know dies out and as the governments that we know who rule the world try to enslave us mentally, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and economically. On that note, thank you again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And also on all of our social media platforms here, go and do the same thing. We really appreciate it. Now, on to the fire. We're about to go live. Thank you so much. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid. Hey, for those of you who may join us quickly in the chat, do me a favor real quick. If you can hear me, put a thumbs up or something in the chat real quick. Please do that, because we've been having technical difficulties behind the scene getting this show done. Two of my computers were taken down, two of them. So I'm on one computer. And I'm trying to make sure that everything is going on. So if you can, please put a thumbs up if you can hear me. I would greatly appreciate that. All right. So because I don't want to be talking into the air and no thumbs up. I see Mark Rice in the chat. Hey, Mark, if you can hear me, put a thumbs up in the chat, please. All right. Let me go to the chat real quick. Give me a second, everybody. We're waiting for Martin, Sieff to join us. I just sent them a message letting them know that we're live and we're trying to check everything. Prior to the show, 2 computers were taken down. You know, I do the show with 3 computers. 2 of them were taken down and this one was jammed or whatever like this. And so now we're trying to make sure that everything is kosher. Everything is halal, you know. So let me look in the chat real quick. So I'm trying to monitor everything and do everything off one computer at this moment. And maybe after the show, I'll be able to check everything. So let me see what's in the chat. Let me go to live stream real quick. Can you hear me? Hold on one second. You hear me? Boy, I tell you what, between YouTube and StreamYard, man, you guys have got to stop this. You guys have got to stop this. Also, I'm looking in my StreamYard. They're saying that the connection with Rumble has been cut. So I'm dealing with both of those. So, but we're going to keep rocking and rolling until Martin Sieff joins us. Hopefully, they're not blocking him or something, that's going on. But it's ironic that prior to the show, two computers, the one to my left and the one to my right, were taken down, and the one in the middle is experiencing glitches and problems or whatever like that. So, but we're going to go on just like there is we have the guests, and just like if we have both of the computers on either side, and we're going to go into the news and wait for Martin to join us. Okay, so I want to address something in the news while we're talking. There's an article out on. I just got a message. Hold on. There's an article out on Sputnik, or Sputnik, as they call it. Some people call it Sputnik. Some people call it Sputnik International. And there's an article from Scott Ritter, which is the main featured article right now, as of 2 hours ago. I caught it. All right. Thank you, Farza. Thank you so much. I needed that. Thank you so much. Oh man, I'm telling you, they are attacking the show left and right. This is why I say you guys have got to subscribe, hit the like button and all of that to keep us in the search engine, because they're going to do everything and anything they can to prevent the show from progressing, to frustrate the listeners and the viewers, and also to try to frustrate me. You can't frustrate me like that. Oh, I'm built for this. But again, let's go to something. There's an article by Scott Ritter. It's titled, Ukraine Shows U.S. Military Not Ready for Major War. Now, as soon as I saw that this morning, I said, man, I didn't even read it. I said, man, I got to bring this up. I want to bring it up to Martin when he gets in the booth or whatever. So Martin has not arrived yet. And there is a time zone differential. So he may have something like confused, but I did send him an extra message. But this article, we're going to read it together. And it's from Scott Ritter, okay? And it says, Sputnik brings you the latest insights from Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine intelligence officer and UN weapons inspector. He was the UN chief weapons inspector, not just a weapons inspector. He was the one that they built the weapons inspection team around, okay? He says, where he explains why the U.S. Army is not ready for the full-scale war against Russia based on failed Ukrainian counteroffensive attempts. Now, before I indulge in the article, I see Martin. I see he's in the booth. We'll bring him in, and we'll come back to that. So, how's it going today, Martin? How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Sensible temperature, but quite humid, Rashid. Okay. Otherwise, great to see you, man, face to face.
I am so thankful and so blessed that you took me up on my offer and that you've come on the show. Could you tell the people a little bit about yourself before we start talking about the geopolitical issues and the ramifications of American policies?
I've been covering them since I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, Rashid. I'm an old Irish newsman. I came over here in my early 30s. I was in Washington, D.C. with the Washington Times and then with United Press International in different positions for well over a quarter century, nearly 30 years. And I've worked for other major international news outlets from all over Europe and Eurasia and Asia, including China and from Germany too, since then. So I've been up and down and in and out and seen everything from the inside out.
Yes. So, Martin, if I may ask you this, it seems like that there's no adults in Washington, D.C., and it seems like that they continue to double and quadruple down on failed policies and package it as if they are the victors of this. Why is the strategic thinking in Washington, D.C. so childish?
I wonder about that myself, Rashid, because it's not a matter of just, evil liberals, wise conservatives, or idiot, greedy conservatives and principled liberals. If you look at both the Republicans and the Democrats, with a few honorable exceptions, they're almost all like that. And the interesting thing is the few people who challenge the consensus, who ask the same questions, are either way out on the right or way out on the left. And I don't think it's a question of them being extremist on the right or extremist on the left. I think it's a question of they reject what I call the zombie consensus. There was an idea that liberal internationalism, get rid of borders, have elections everywhere all the time, but only when they produce the people we want them to produce, right? Mm-hmm. Total free trade, no borders. Even though it opens the way for international crime and white slavery and human trafficking and global prostitution on a scale almost never before seen in history since hundreds of years ago, since the Dark Ages, that these are all good things and you are not allowed to question them. And you have a whole generation raised in the American college system. They're rich, they're poor, they're black, white, Asian. They've all, it doesn't matter what religion they are, Catholic, mainstream Protestant, fundamentalist, even some Muslims have swallowed the Kool-Aid. But everybody swallows the Kool-Aid. That's the problem. So what you have in Washington is you have gasoline entities on both parties who appoint other gasoline entities around them who are sycophants, who are courtiers. You could not survive on a Washington staff because you're an honest man. You would open your big, fat, stupid, honest mouth and you would say something truthful and you'd be gone, right? And I survived as long as I did because I was from Ireland. I had wild hair. I was obviously an exotic, so they didn't have to take me seriously. I was the fool in King Lear, I was the clown. And people like to have their clowns around. And even when clowns give them good advice when nobody else will, they never listen. It's in Shakespeare all the time. Shakespeare saw this the whole time. You have a court of a stupid old king like King Lear or Othello, and he'll have a fool. They'll have fools around them. And the fools will tell them the truth and nobody else will. And they won't listen to the fools, And if the fool is lucky, they'll be the last one left standing. More often than not, the psychopaths make sure to kill them off too. So the further away you are from Washington, Rashid, down there in Florida, a very wise move. It's about as far south from D.C. as you can get. Stay that way, man.
I'm trying to make heads or tails of this because it seems like these people are living in bizarro world. I often say bizarro world because up is down, in is out, right is wrong, and when you reveal this, you become enemy number one. And they're trying to impose upon people. They say that you have the freedom of choice, but then they try to impose upon you their way of thinking. And what's crazy about this is the Western nations, specifically America and the UK, claim to be the trumpeters of freedom, justice and equality and diversity, and yet they are the ones who are stymieing diverse thought. They are the ones who are trying to prevent an array of different thought from coming into being because it's against the government narrative or the elite's narrative. So do they understand that with those policies, they're dumbing down their population, which in turns over time destroys the ability of that population for critical thinking and to be, force the societies to progress? Because when you dumb down somebody, it may benefit you for a short time, but the ramifications of that would be astronomical over time.
I mean, look, all I have to do is say yes, and please have me on again. It's the easiest thing in the world. All I have to do is agree with you because you've already made the key points, Rashid. You're absolutely right. There are two people I always quote on this. First, George Orwell. Wonderful man. fabulous man who exposed the Soviet Union and its lies, but he also exposed the lies of the West. People forget that the Ministry of Truth was modeled on the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, where Orwell worked during World War II, and he hated every minute of it. And the description of the Ministry of Truth, right down to the absolutely awful food in its cafeterias, which he goes into in great detail in 1984, was not made up from the imagination of Orwell. It's what he endured when he was being tortured as a producer at the British Broadcasting Corporation in World War II. And what does Orwell tell us in 1984? He tells us that language is perverted and turned inside out, and you're forced to believe it. So the Ministry of War is called the Ministry of Peace. The Ministry of Propaganda is called the Ministry of Truth. And the Ministry of destroying the economy for greed and selfishness and through just sheer cruelty is called the Ministry of Plenty. Isn't that where we are today? What, isn't that the Biden administration and the Obama administration? But it was also the George W. Bush administration. And there are many things to object to or feel uncomfortable around President Donald Trump, but I'll say two things for him. First, he is not a racist. He's very irresponsible. I mean, if you've marched to the beat of his drum, or God forbid we could have a civil war, and I do not want a civil war in this country. I do not believe in revolution. But the trouble is, the people, you nailed it, the people who would be the first to be destroyed by revolution are the people who are making revolution inevitable today. The very same people. The people at the top of the Republican and Democratic parties and the people running the government of the United States of America and running the Senate and the House, especially the Senate. The House is becoming a bit more responsive, and I can at least think of two, maybe 2.5 senators who are capable at some point, they haven't quite climbed out of it yet, but have shown some signs of breaking the consensus. That's 2.5 out of 100. By recent standards in America, that's very good going. Right? This is not the best educated nation in history. It is the worst educated nation in history. I have 2 Oxford degrees. I have graduate work done from the London School of Economics, and no American school teaches you how to think. None of them teach you to criticize what you just said. None of them teach you to challenge what they tell you. You have to swallow it all, and that's what you get your grades on. And then you go up in the world by being a courtier, by being an ass licker. Every tongue in Washington is brown. The only issue is what shades of brown from how in one's behind exactly one has to lick. But that is the only way to rise in Washington. And they do. And this is why you have, it doesn't get better, it keeps getting worse. The mediocrities keep getting worse. The people we have running things today are the heirs of Hillary Clinton. In the Republican Party, it's the heirs of George W. Bush, not even the father, who was a harsh, ruthless, cynical, dangerous, sociopathic man. But a very able and forceful man as well. I met him personally a number of times. A very impressive and forceful personality, and capable of doing great good as well as great bad. He was a fascinating figure that way. In that way, you could compare him with Lyndon Johnson or John Kennedy. You know, people who did great harm and destructive things, but who also did, in other respects, very honorable and idealistic things. It was mixed. But with his son, it was just stupidity all the way. I mean, you had to meet the man to feel the level of stupidity coming off him. Former British Prime Minister Liz Truss is the same. There are certain, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. You cannot understand the depth of the sincerity and stupidity of these people until you actually meet them in person. And then you can cut it with a knife. And this is terrifying. I did a piece recently. I don't think I sent it to you yet. I'll try and get it to you. But I made the point, we are not being run by Henry Kissinger, still a dynamo at 100 years old. Of course we aren't. We aren't being run by Hillary Clinton, who is drunk 99.8% of the time. Who is running us? Nobody is running us. Jake Sullivan is running us, the National Security Advisor. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is running us. Look in their eyes, look on their faces, look at the way they read from the teleprompter blandly with glazed eyes every day. Does that make you feel safe? Would it make you feel safe? Why are the American people not suffering nightmares? Because they're drugged.
Yeah. And this is one of the main points that it seems like I repeat this over and over again, and it seems like most pundits don't get this. America, for America to be to prosper, for America to maintain her hegemony, for the Western world to maintain its prosperity and its hegemony, it needs the proper guidance, the proper education.
Yes,
and
exactly.
all across from the US to the UK to France, they are defunding the educational systems. So now you have teachers who are stewards of the future generations, fashioning their minds. They don't allow critical thinking, and they're too preoccupied with trying to find a part-time job to help compensate for the lack of funds that they're getting. So they're not all in on the educational system, which dumbs down the people. And then there's government regulations which stipulate that you can only say this or do this, which kills critical thinking. Now, if that's the case, and you have little kids that are not in an environment that advocates critical thinking and progressive thinking, how can you maintain your position technologically, economically, politically, socially? To me, that is the thermite at the base of Western civilization. The dumbing down of the citizenry means the collapse of the Western world. It may not happen right then and there. It is equated to a snake. You cut the head of the snake off. The snake twitches for up to 3 or 4 hours because the body still believes that it's alive until rigor mortis sets in. That, to me, is what we see in Western society. What do you have to say on that?
Again, please have me back on again. It's the easiest show I ever do in my life. I agree with you. There, period. Nothing else to say. But you have nailed it. There is a book I recommend. I often recommend it to people. Came out more than half a century ago. One of Britain's greatest historians, and he was I've never met him, but he had a huge influence on my life. Corelli Barnett, Barnett, an unusual first name, Corelli, or one or two R's, I forget. But the book is called The Collapse of British Power. It came out 1970. It's a huge book, it's about 600, 700 pages. And he discovers not just the fact of the collapse of the British Empire between the two world wars, between 1919 and 1940, but he asks, why did it happen? He asks the same questions you have just asked and comes up with the same answers exactly, Rashid. He finds it in the educational system. The English ruling classes were all conditioned by going to the English public schools. Now, on paper, they were very different, and on Masterpiece Theatre, they looked like wonderful places and full of great philosophers and this, that, and the other. Corelli Barnett says, no, they taught no science, they taught no common sense, they taught no math, they taught no engineering, they didn't teach anyone how to replace a fuse box. I mean, when I came to America, I became a relative success because I started to think American in American society. I found everything I had learned from two degrees in succession from Oxford University, and then graduate work at the London School of Economics, was useless in the real world. And all my friends who stayed in Britain and would not learn went down the tubes. Right? And of course, they still thought they were superior to everyone else. They would have done wonderfully in modern Washington. But now I see half a century on history has repeated itself. We have in America an education system. I mean, if you look at Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor of the United States, you look at his face and it's Mr. Bean. Rowan Atkinson playing Mr. Bean. He's an idiot who creates chaos and failure in every direction, right? He sets off and deliberately elongs the bloodiest war Europe has seen in nearly a century since World War II, the bloodbath and the slaughter of the innocent Ukrainian people in a war they were propelled into and had no democratic say in choosing for themselves. Right? He loses Saudi Arabia, the main key swing oil producer to the world in the West. He provokes Russia, our most dangerous enemy, to preparing for thermonuclear war against us. In Afghanistan, he and Antony Blinken and Secretary of State Lloyd Austin completely failed. They think they've got 6 months for the Taliban to maybe will eventually take over, and maybe not even then. The Taliban walk in 1 week later. Now, I had predicted this months before, And you know why I predicted it? Because I had read an official intelligence document released to the public. It was open source material. It was released to the public from the Department of Defense, from an office called, nobody will have heard of, I'm sure, called SIGAR, SIGAR, which stands for Special Inspector General on Afghanistan Reconstruction. And the SIGAR office is still run by honest men and women, black and white, young and old, American, Indian, Asian, but genuine patriots and honest people in the best sense. And it has been documenting the enormous corruption and the stealing of hundreds of billions, not hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions with a B of dollars from our so-called aid to Afghanistan, none of which ever went to the army there or to the ordinary people. They're not remotely. Finally, Afghanistan's I think you know this very well. Afghanistan, while we were protecting it, flooded the world with opium for heroin. Mm-hmm. And now it isn't doing that anymore. The opium fields are being exterminated. Who is exterminating them? The big bad Taliban, our arch enemies. Which they are. And I'm not trying to prettify the Taliban. What they do, they have no conception of women's rights. What they do to human rights in general, and to ladies specifically, is abominable. And yet even they are better than we were. Even they are better than we were. You have to sink very low. I'm not prettifying the Taliban. You have to sink very low to be lower than the Taliban, and we managed it in Afghanistan. But the SIGAR office in April of 1921 issued a public report, not a secret report, a public report. Anyone could have clicked onto it on the internet at the time. I'm sure at least 3 or 7 people did. It would not have been more than that in a population of 330 million. And what did the official Pentagon office on Afghanistan reconstruction say? As soon as the American troops are removed from Afghanistan, within 2 weeks or so, the regime will fall. Mm-hmm. It will not be a matter of years or months. It will be a matter of weeks, and only a few weeks at that. It will be virtually instantaneous. Now, this happened, but it took President Joe Biden and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. It took them by surprise. This was the key report on what would happen after we withdraw, produced by their own government, and they did not read it. Now you see the towering mountains of stupidity and ignorance and complacency that come here. You need a Warner Brothers cartoon to do justice to it.
You know, I often... when I talk about the educational system, yes, because I believe that holds so much weight to whether America or the Western world makes it or taken under. And when we look at these problems, these social problems in America, the explosion of violence in urban America, the explosion of violence in suburban America, the cultural divide, a lot of that can be traced back to the dumbing down of the educational system. Yes. If you don't offer the proper guidance and you have people in hopeless situations, that, people mimic their environments. Some people want to get out of the environments, but if they've lost all hope, and then they revert to the laws of the jungle. And that's what happened. And no one wants to acknowledge or talk about the ramification of these imperialistic policies. Think about this as we talk on the educational system, the dumbing down of the masses. When we look at the programs that America and the West offers to these occupied nations, or these nations that they claim are allies, they are willing to invest more money into the Ukrainian war or into Afghanistan, or maintaining a base, when the U.S. government budget office stated that it would take only $20 billion to eradicate homelessness across the United States, another $20 billion to completely eradicate poverty. We have given that multiple times over to prosecute a war, an unjust war, in Ukraine for the sake of trying to maintain hegemony. And the blowback effect is this: America and the West are being exposed. The weapons are being exposed as less than what's advertised. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. There is a growing threat of a conflict between East and Western blocs, all because of the insane policies to defund the educational system and put that money towards the prosecution and persecution of war. What do you have to say on that?
I agree with you again. I mean, I could not put it better. I can put it worse and more lively and more worldly, and being I will. But no, man, you're right. That is exactly it. And again, what fascinates me and appalls me in this is the stupidity of it. I think the stupidity is even deeper than the greed. Because when you know these people, they're very inadequate people, and they have to believe they're geniuses. Paul Wolfowitz was a genius, and he was surrounded by all these appalling little cockroaches and slugs who knew they weren't geniuses, but thought if they were next to a genius like Richard Pearl or Paul Wolfowitz or Douglas Feith, that would make them geniuses too, right? And it was once said about Richard Nixon that you could not imagine Richard Nixon as an ordinary boy having fun, getting into fights, chasing girls, playing baseball, anything. You could only imagine a 2 to 3 foot tall, 8 or 9 year old Richard Nixon, already dressed in a suit with a tie and a pressed shirt, waving an American flag and jumping out of a closet and smelling of mothballs and saying, "I want to be president. I'm running for president." Right? Never imagine a boy who, and in a way that's unfair to Nixon, who was a more complex and tormented soul, for which let us give him credit at least for that. Right? But today we have that nightmare, and they have cloned tens of thousands of them, and they run the United States of America. They're all mediocrities. They all march in lockstep. They all think alike. They all believe they are geniuses. They all believe, along with that, so many fakes, so many false prophets. There was a great English Jewish liberal rabbi, I think he's still around, hopefully, Rabbi Jonathan McGonatt, great biblical critic. The opposite in the world from being a fundamentalist loon. And he points out that if you look at the Hebrew Bible, it isn't a good thing to be a prophet. The Bible does not celebrate most prophets, it condemns them. There are a few really big ones who are the heroes. Everybody knows their names: Elijah, Jeremiah, Isaiah. But there are hundreds of them. There are most of them named by names, who are false prophets, who screw it up, who get it wrong, who claim to talk in God's name. And it never happens. And when people trust them and believe in them, the country gets destroyed every time. Does that sound familiar in modern America? God is on our side. Well, if God is on our side, how come the Taliban are running Afghanistan? If God is on our side, how come we had to run between our legs from Vietnam? Oh, yeah, we were stabbed in the back in Vietnam. That's how Ludendorff and the German army put off their own rank incompetence in killing 2 million German boys in World War I. And the German people were dumb enough to believe them. And then they followed Hitler. Was that an improvement? No, it was not. Exactly. And we are going, but it is a consequence of everything that you have just said, Rashid. It is a consequence of the shutting down of open debate in America. And thank God you are here, and thank God the Red Pill Diaries are here, and outfits like Rogue Radio and TNT Radio, and you other guys are here online, because you, at least until they get around to shutting you down, and believe me, Blinken will, bureaucrats move very slowly, but they move relentlessly. They're after us all in the end. And I cited before George Orwell. There's one other name I want to cite to you. And I'm sure you know the name very well, but he's a very interesting man. He was the guy who wanted to be the first fascist dictator of America. Yet he was supportive of Black people, and he protected Jewish people from anti-Semitism. And he was a successful governor in the South. Isn't that interesting? A white governor in the South who stands up to the Ku Klux Klan and kicks them out of Louisiana, and he becomes the most popular politician among white people in the South who are not remotely as stupid as they are made out in retrospect to have been in the 1930s. His name was Senator Huey P. Long. Right? And Huey Long was asked if fascism could ever take over the United States of America, the embodiment of freedom. And Huey Long replied, sure it can. Much better if I could do a decent Louisiana Nolans accent, you understand. Sure it can. Only it'll call itself anti-fascism.
Yes.
And that's what we have since the Patriot Act today. George W. Bush was a useful idiot used by the powers that be to shut down free debate of what was left of it in America in the name of preserving free debate. He destroyed democracy in the name of saving democracy. And that's what they do. Any crime is permissible, including to save democracy, including the subversion of democracy. If democracy will produce someone that you don't want, whether it is Trump or Tulsi Gabbard or Louis Farrakhan or anyone, right, of the right or the left, if they are unacceptable, you shut them down. And it doesn't matter if you shoot them or you create endless lies about them, and the media turns out endless lies about them, as they certainly did about Trump. I mean, and there were real things you could have tried to impeach Trump on, and instead they do it on issues that are jokes. It's a smoke. As an old friend of the late, very eminent Lieutenant General Bill Odom, who ran the National Security Agency before it was a cover-up purely for the deep state, liked to say about these things. He said, this is all smoke and mirrors, Martin. You have to understand, this is the way politics are played in Washington. It's all a game. Mm-hmm. There are serious things happening, but you don't see them happening. All you see is the game. All you see is the play acting. And so nobody dares say the emperor has no clothes. Nobody dares to say what you have just said. And the public's brain is sodden. And Orwell was right again. Orwell says in 1984, he has his character Winston Smith, who of course is his own voice, his own spokesperson, saying, if there is hope, it cannot come from the intellectual professional classes. They have been totally co-opted by the state. They are totally drunk in self-righteousness. They are totally loyal to they swallow mindlessly every lie they are given. I paraphrase here, but read it yourselves. The idea is clear, right? You folks out there. But he says, if there is hope, it comes from the proles. It comes from the people who are supposedly uneducated, who have not had higher education, who do not read the New York Times, or at least, thank God, do not take it seriously, who do not religiously and piously watch PBS News and CNN every day, or for that matter, Fox. Mm-hmm. They are the people who will laugh at your jokes, Rashid. Mm-hmm. That is where hope lies. Because these are people who are still looking at things with their own. I mean, Groucho Marx, a genius, put it so well. He's trying to bamboozle in one show some poor schnook out of his life savings. And he says, come on, who do you believe? Me or your own eyes?
Yes. Now,
nobody believes their own eyes in America anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm trying to figure out this with all of these people, all of these think tanks, all of these these politicians that have degree after degree after degree. Can't they see they're trying to maintain dollar hegemony at all costs, because that's the life's blood for the U.S. empire and the Western world to dominate. But at every turn, they alienate the very people who they need to buy the U.S. debt. At every turn, they alienate the very people who they need to trade with, who they need to do deals with, and then they surround them with military bases. And this costs tens of millions and even billions of dollars, especially with the so-called freedom of navigation, selling through different waters, and also with these war games everywhere across the globe. Do you think that these people are detached from reality? Because it seems like common sense with them does not exist. It's not so common today because they are alienating the very people whom they need to purchase the debt to maintain dollar hegemony. And before you answer that, think about this. They are in the Taiwan Strait, causing problems with the PLA and the Chinese people. China is America's largest trading partner. China is the largest exporter. The U.S. largest investor, has 4 of the 5 top banks in the world, has the largest amount of billionaires in the world. 93 to 95% of all goods on the shelves of every store in America comes from China or a byproduct of China. How is it that the people who make policies cannot see that, hey, if we continue to stoke them, the Chinese will sell the debt, the Chinese will embargo us. If they embargo us, we're already spiraling down economically. If they embargo us, within 2 weeks, there's no food on the shelves. There's defaults with shipping companies, trains, cargo planes, everything. Now we're dealing with an economic death spiral with banks going up because companies have defaulted on loans and massive unemployment. Do these people think into that, or do they just look at the tip of something and take just the tip? Just a tip. I'm just asking, because it seems like there's no rational or sound guidance or sound policies coming out of these people.
Yes. Winston Churchill gave a speech in the British Parliament in 1938 during the Munich crisis, when Neville Chamberlain, still prime minister of an empire that incredibly, as late as 1938-39, controlled a quarter of the population of the world and a quarter of the territory of the world, that had been built on 400 years of trade, trading, enslavement, genocide, shameless conquest, and it worked. And they lost it all in less than a decade. One of Churchill's allies, a highly decadent man himself, Lord Robert Boothby, said at the time, it took the Romans 200, they managed to lose the most powerful empire the world had ever seen in less than 10 years. It took the Roman Empire 200 years of perfectly enjoyable decadence to achieve the same result. Now we see the same thing here. And you have said it. All they see is the tip of the iceberg. They are ignoramuses who think they are geniuses. They were raised up by other ignoramuses. All they are capable of is recognizing other ignoramuses. Why are you not a national security advisor to the President of the United States? I'll tell you why. Because of everything you have just said. Because it's true. Because you see the problem. And I know people on the hardline military right who see the problem in almost identical terms to you. You come from totally different cultures. You might disagree on fundamental issues, but to save this country, you are both on the same page and you both see the issues and the problems and the paradoxes clearly. And none of you from either the healthy, the remains of the reviving healthy patriotic left or the reviving healthy patriotic right, you can work together, and even when you can't work together, you can dialogue fruitfully and interact with each other. But neither of you is going to be allowed to make any of the changes that are needed to be made because the self-interests are basically there. You have the enormous defense corporations, you have the enormous... Look, in 1980, there were more than 55 major defense corporations in America. In the past 40 years, that has shrunk to 5. They all simply joined each other. They amalgamated. And this did not make America more efficient and safe. It made America totally incompetent and unsafe. Because when there is healthy competition, even in the capitalist market, success and competence, it's like in the media business, success and competence in a free market will ultimately win and take advantage of. Survival of the fittest in the most creative sense of the word. There was a great Austrian economist, free market economist, who I'm great admirer of, Joseph Schumpeter, who talked about the creative destruction of capitalism. But for that, it has to be a genuine capitalism. It has to be free. And of course, we don't have that. We have the worst aspects of capitalism, the worst aspects of socialism. And when we need the best aspects of both to keep each other in balance and at bay, we have neither. We have neither. We have this ghastly system which could not reform itself even if it wanted to, and does not want to, and does not have the awareness to want to. And therefore, they are the vampire, and you're holding up the cross in front of them. So of course they're terrified and they run screaming from you. And you are surprised by this.
So what do you think about the situation that is going on in the Ukrainian conflict, with the West saying that they're not a party to the conflict, yet they armed Ukraine to the standards of NATO? They allowed for the Ukrainians to bombard the Donbass for decades. Because I want to address this, and I also want to go to Africa. But first, I want to address this. What do you think is on their minds to stoke tensions with the world's largest nuclear power on its border, to ignore its red lines, and to push the world closer to thermonuclear war than we've ever been before?
Oh, I can tell you. I knew Zbigniew Brzezinski personally very well, because when I came to Washington at the Washington Times, I was very young at the time, but I was put in one of the hottest beats in American journalism by my boss, the late Count Arno de Bourgrave, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Times. And because of the contacts Arno was able to direct me to and his insights, and I worked hard myself, I was able to report the Soviet Union was going to collapse and disintegrate years before anybody else saw it in Washington, D.C. And Zbigniew Brzezinski loved this because he was a fierce anti-communist, as was and am I. But he was something I am not as well. He's a Polish aristocrat by background. And of course, his kids are now very eminent in the Republican and Democratic parties, and his daughter on national television. So you're not allowed to say this on the mainstream. They hate Russia like poison. Mm-hmm. And they taught an entire generation of Democrats how to think about Russia. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Antony Blinken, who worked for Hillary Clinton, Jake Sullivan, who worked for Hillary Clinton. And all of them sat at the feet of Madeleine Albright and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who hated all Russians like poison. And I did not read this in books. I knew Brzezinski well personally. He was not an anti-black racist in the slightest. He pushed Barack Obama to be president of the United States. He promoted him. He was not anti-Jewish to any degree. He consistently maintained high levels of support and funding for Israel through the 1970s. Nor was he anti-Muslim in principle, though he preferred radical extremist Muslims who killed innocent Muslims because they were more likely to kill Russian soldiers. Because the only thing Brzezinski cared about was killing Russians. He hated Russia. And Jake Sullivan comes out of that same basket, and he has been openly reported as saying so, and you should especially look at the reporting of Seymour Hersh on this on his Substack. Jake Sullivan has boasted, and so have top senators in the United States Senate, that we are bleeding Russia dry, and that is why the Ukraine war must continue. Now, we are not bleeding Russia dry. Russian casualties are significant, but not fundamentally serious. They may have lost 50, 60,000 dead, which is very bad since the beginning of the war. The poor Ukrainians have lost 500,000 dead. And also the Ukrainians have lost not one, but 3 armies because they trusted. They were stupid enough to trust the military advice our people were giving them. We even have better generals than that. General Mark Milley, who's now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is on the record as having warned against pushing the Ukrainians to push on this catastrophic counteroffensive that cost them at least 100,000 and possibly 200,000 lives this spring and summer. But General Milley appears to have been ineffectual because he was one voice crying in the wilderness. And even from his eminent position, the entire thrust of the defense establishment in the United States was to feed the Ukrainian boyhood. And we have not, that Ukraine has raised and been trained by the United States with 3 armies. We did a miserable job on each occasion. All the boys in all 3 armies are now dead or with all their limbs blown off. Mm-hmm. And now we are raising a 4th army, if we can, in Ukraine under a cliquish regime that is not Democrat, that we put there and sustains there. It is not Democrat to any degree. But again, I am horrified. I look at people my age, people who I went to university with in Britain, people who are professional colleagues of mine, both liberal and conservative in America over the past 30 years, and they have all swallowed the Kool-Aid. They don't have to. Why don't they read Cy Hersh? Seymour Hersh had the guts to expose the My Lai massacre in Vietnam more than 55, 56 years ago when nobody else had the courage to do it, and he did. And now he's 86 years old, and he's still breaking the truth about the Ukraine war today, when none of the thousands of these wonderful, best and brightest graduates of Columbia School of Journalism and Pulitzer Prize winners and brilliant, thoughtful, beard-stroking, unlike me, dignified pundits at the New York Times or the Washington Post, not one of them has the balls to do it. Not one of them.
No.
The men don't have balls and the women don't have backbone. None of them have backbone.
You know, that brings me to something about, you said something about we're at the fourth army that's being raised up by Ukraine, by NATO. Now, again, this is money, this is blood. This America and the West are investing in Ukraine more than they're investing in their own citizens, in their own infrastructure, in their own
yes,
people.
Absolutely.
At a time where everything is being cut, from education to Head Start, everything. So now Scott Ritter has an article on Sputnik News, and it says Ukraine shows U.S. military not ready for major war. Now, and this article brings to mind something. If that is this is the fourth army, and the first 2 or 3 armies were raised to such high NATO standards, and Russia completely obliterated those armed forces. Not only obliterated them, but destroyed the so-called advanced weaponry, and even destroyed the notion of combined arms tactics. Now Ukrainians are reverting back to Soviet tactics because they said that the combined arm tactics are not working or not worth the salt of Western trainers. What does that say about the time for the West as the dominant military powers? And Russia, and think about this before you answer this. Russia has only committed 10% of its armed forces to that battle, and they have not even, it's not even as serious as a war because they have labeled it a special military operation. So what does that say about America and Western true military capabilities vis-a-vis Russia's newly acquired military capabilities?
Tene tekel upsharon. Book of Daniel. It never happened. It's a fairy tale, but everybody knows the words in English. Thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting. It's the writing on the wall. You have nailed it. I've written on this. Nobody else, I think, has. Oh, that can't be right. There are a few admirable people who certainly have. But almost nobody pays attention to what you have just pointed out, which is the entire military, the myth of NATO's military dominance since the collapse of communism and the collapse of the Warsaw Pact is now gone. 30 years of deterrence is gone. And they know it. And are they going to stop at the Polish border when the Poles are their most bitter enemies? I don't think so. Or if they do, it will only be for a little while. And then we pulled the cork out of the bottle. We unleashed the genie of revived Russian military dominance in Eurasia. We gave it to them on a plate. We exposed to them all the secrets of our NATO weapon systems, and some of them work very well, but only when they are competently directed and won. We were piss ignorant of. There are 2 great military gurus in history. One, most people in the West who are interested in the subject know all about. The second is still virtually, although people pay lip service to him, they don't internalize him. The first is Karl von Clausewitz, typical German racist dumb thug, right? The German army, which operationally was the best in the world in 1914 and 1939, followed the principles of von Clausewitz, and they lost totally on both occasions. They lost big. That should tell you everything you need to know about von Clausewitz, right? Von Clausewitz is dumb. Attack the main force of the enemy, which is where they're going to be strongest. Ignore, he pays lip service to, but he pays no real attention to the strategic, which you have talked about, the strategic, economic, global context. But the other great military strategist, truly the greatest military strategist of all time, was China's Sun Tzu. And ironically, there's a marvelous documentary that runs all the time on the Pentagon's own American Heroes channel that used to be the military channel. which is very good, which shows how Sun Tzu's teachings explain our success, the outcome of Gettysburg, the outcome of Vietnam, and our success on D-Day, right? Now, we are following, and we force the pro-Ukrainians to follow the principles of Clausewitz. But it's the opposite of Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu says, never attack the enemy's strongest points. Only attack the enemy's weakest points. Mm-hmm. Take the low-hanging fruit. When the great British commander, Field Marshal Montgomery, did this against German supply columns in World War II, the enormously overrated pompous old fool Winston Churchill tried to get Montgomery and his top field commander, General Brian Horrocks, fired because he said they weren't being sporting. They weren't, it wasn't gallant the way war should be fought. Churchill had thrown away 100,000 British and Commonwealth lives under bungled idiot commanders over the previous 2 years. And Montgomery, who, although born in England, was really raised in Australia, so he was really an outsider for the British military establishment too. Montgomery changed all that. He was the finest military commander in the West of the war. And I don't think he even knew Sun Tzu existed, but he practiced Sun Tzu's principles even so. You go through everything Montgomery did in North Africa and Sicily, the deception operations and the breakouts in D-Day. It's all Montgomery and it's all Sun Tzu. In Ukraine, we aren't applying Sun Tzu for a second. Sun Tzu also says a key point from what you just have said: you can give people the best weapons, equipment in the world, far superior to their enemies, as the French had over the Germans in 1940, and you will still lose, and you will lose big. Because it's exactly as you said, Rashid. It's about coordination. It's about how you use the weapons. And the general, as Sun Tzu says, has to know how to use his forces, how to coordinate his forces, how infantry will work with artillery or with cavalry or with tank forces or with air support, how to integrate them all. Or today we have drones. Today we have the swarming battlefield, which our own commanders in the West have no idea. We set up endless bureaucratic structures in the Pentagon to study these things, but nobody actually does anything about it. And we also, of course, follow this ludicrous myth on which we have literally spent trillions, I didn't say millions or billions, I said trillions of dollars, on instantaneous communication between the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. This is our new Gandalf magic wand. This is Harry Potter's wand, right? This is the way. It doesn't matter if Russia and China have 100 times the number of troops that we do. China, by the way, has 200 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States. How did that happen? Why did we let it happen? I'll tell you how it happened. It wasn't conscious treachery. It wasn't, evil manipulators in Wall Street. It was people who read the Wall Street Journal. It was believers in unlimited free trade. It was believers in Adam Smith and David Ricardo. And it was everyone who has ever funded a cent to the Cato Foundation in Washington. The Cato Foundation has done more to undermine American security in the last 40 years than the Communist Party of the United States managed to do in 100 years. It was thankfully always extremely bungled and incompetent. But senators and congressmen and presidents listen to Cato and drink the Kool-Aid of free trade and let American industry be destroyed, whereas the Chinese, who have never fallen into the trap of saying, we must defend our economic borders, we must have tariffs, we must protect our domestic industry. They never fell into that trap. But we did, because we swallowed the Kool-Aid, because we believed the Cato Institute, because we believed Adam Smith, and because we believed David Ricardo. We believed all that poisonous, destructive shit. And that is why our industries are destroyed. And that is why 100,000 young Americans, black and white alike, die of fentanyl poisoning every year. Because the rulers of the United States still drink the Kool-Aid of free trade and Cato and minimum government involvement. And the Democrats do it almost as much as the Republicans.
Our a channel member, Mehdi, puts a $10 super chat up and he says, will we ever see a White House reporter ask the Biden administration, have any active duty military members been KIA in Ukraine since February 24th, 2022? Before you answer that, I want to pull up something for him. Sure. According to Military Times, on July 27th, 2023, The Pentagon has authorized additional, so they had already authorized some, but this was in addition to what they had authorized. Listen, the Pentagon has authorized an additional hazard pay for U.S. troops serving in Ukraine, a defense official confirmed Thursday. The bonus was known as imminent danger pay, is offered to troops who serve in areas where they could be harmed by hostile fire or mines, insurrection, civil war, or terrorism. So there's your answer right there. There are U.S. troops on the ground, and they've been there. That's your answer. That comes from the Military Times. What have you to say on that? Because it's something I want to go back to after you answer him. That's something that you said that was poignant.
First of all, Mehdi and you too, Rashid, again, yes. You both nailed it. And to go a little further, Rashid, the point you asked answers the question. Whether people have been killed, will we ever see a White House reporter ask the Biden administration? Yes, of course we will, because they will have been told to. I have been a White House reporter. To be a White House reporter, with the honorable exception of the late Helen Thomas, who bizarrely enough, I was actually her boss for a year. And at first we loathed each other totally. And actually at the end, it developed a kind of a very not great friendship. It could not be. We were too different and from different generations, totally different people. But we developed a strange, bewildered respect for each other for one very simple reason. We both opposed publicly as well as privately the war on Iraq in 2003. And Helen, who was in her late 70s at the time, if not already in her 80s, was the only member of the entire White House press corps to have the integrity and the guts to ask the unpopular questions, which of course were never answered. And this late 70s-year-old, early 80s-year-old, very elderly lady was treated by the press officials of the Bush administration and by her own so-called colleagues in the great White House press corps as if she was a joke when they were the jokes. And she was the last free voice in America to say those things. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have expected of Helen beforehand, because when I was put in, I was nobody, and she was already a living legend for 30 or 40 years before that. And she was doing almost no work at the time. And I would have fired her, but I knew you can't fire a living legend. They'd have hired me instead. And she knew the same thing, and she despised me because I had been put in position by Arno de Boergraaf, who was her archenemy. Right? One of the great joys of life at United Press International at those days was to watch Arno de Boergraaf and Helen Thomas pretending to be polite to each other when the hatred between them was crackling like high-tension electricity over your head. It was hilariously funny. Right? But so I never expected to respect Helen, but I certainly came to, because as a reporter, at least by then, she was doing nothing. But she knew what was right. She knew what was wrong. She asked the right questions. She never got a single answer. She and Cy Hirsch are so different in the kinds of people they are, the positions they come from. But they have this in common. They're like you, Rashid. They're afraid of nobody. And they can't get away from their own integrity. They can't help being honest men and women. So I was proud to support Helen in that. But it shook even me that a living legend could even then. I kept thinking of a line Jesus uses in the Gospels when he's being condemned in a fixed court and what have you. And he says, "Don't weep for me, people of Jerusalem. Weep for yourselves, because if they do these things when the wood is green, what are they going to do when the wood is dry and it burns more easily?" Mm-hmm. And that's what I felt then. My God, if they can even shut up and delegitimize Helen Thomas for asking the question everybody else should also have asked before her, but nobody else would dare to or even want to. How far have we already gone, and how far are we still going to go? And we see the answer today. We are still descending into the infernal pit. And the infernal pit means thermonuclear war. And while there are lots of individuals out there, like your excellent self, who see it, there is nobody in mainstream Washington who dares speak out in it and call the shots. None of them.
You know, I was thinking on what you said about Brzezinski and how national security advisor, I keep forgetting his name, Sullivan, Jake Sullivan,
Yes.
and how they absolutely hate Russia. We can't forget about Nuland and her husband, Kagan, and how they have institutes that are dedicated to the demonization and eventually the making war with Russia and China. I mean, it seems like they would rather sacrifice the entire nation and even the entirety of the Western world to settle an age-old vendetta against Russia or China. I mean, isn't that madness?
It is madness indeed. And there's another factor that Sullivan has talked about, and I've reported, but the only people to report on this, the guy who broke it, again, as usual, was Seymour Hersh. And I think the only person to pick up on his lead and run with it after him has been me. And it is this, that Jake Sullivan convened an economic reconstruction summit, which seemed strange to everyone at the time, in Saudi Arabia. It was unimportant. How can you reconstruct Ukraine when the war is still going on? Mm-hmm. The answer is he thought the war would be over by the time the summit got together, and he didn't even invite Russia because he really believed, and he told his own people this, that the Ukrainian counteroffensive would destroy the Russian army and Russia would now be falling apart quite literally, so that we would now be in another 1919 Woodrow Wilson Versailles moment when the United States of America would be redrawing the entire map of Eurasia and Russia would be gone. You see, they don't realize they're going to a war they cannot win and are doomed to lose with Russia and China. You are right. You see it clearly because you are sane. But all they see is their dream, their vision, that Russia is and China are only things standing on the way of the one liberal, universal democracy, our way, a universal chaotic super state where you can have slave trading and heroin trading across the borders and uncontrolled opium growing back again in Afghanistan. The good old days will be back with unlimited profits for the CIA and the major pharma companies, and most of all for the big defense contractors, of whom there are only 5 left in America, right? This is all they can see. This is their vision of heaven, which is everybody else's vision of hell. But they still are mad enough to think they can achieve it. They are sleepwalking in their dream. And even when their souls and ours are ripped apart at 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures in thermonuclear explosions, and the Russians have at least 60 major hydrogen bombs targeted on the Washington area alone, another 20 or so in New York as well, and most of the rest of the country. They really believe this isn't going to happen. They really believe Russia is going to meekly eventually fall apart. They really believe all the lies they want to believe. They are true believers. And their belief dwarfs the faith of any Crusader fanatics in the Middle Ages. Dwarfs the belief of it. At least that the Crusaders weren't cutting loose with thermonuclear weapons. And the Pope today has more sense. He's trying to warn them against it. There are people trying to warn them against it, but they will not listen to them or to you. Certainly not to me, but I mean, I knew that.
It's absolutely stunning because, again, I'm saying even a little kid can see, okay, I get all of my 90% of my stuff off the shelves and they come from China, my neighbor down the street. Okay, why would I go in my neighbor's house and start a fight with him and his children when me and my family need the gratuity of my neighbor to continue out and sustain our lives? But the leadership, they don't look at it like that. They're like, to hell with everybody. Truth be damned, I want to impose my policy on everybody. They want to be the gods and lords of the world. This is why it's always spoken of as American exceptionalism. America must lead. America must do this. America. Why? Why isn't she content to be a nation among equal nations? Why must she lead? Why must she dictate? What? That is that mind state. Remember, you brought up something biblical. And so God, he created man in his image and his likeness. And he fashioned them and he molded them. Okay, this is what America and the Western world are trying to do with everybody else. They are trying to force them to and mold them into their idea, into their democracy, into their government, into their way. And this is an impossibility because of the dialect, because of the culture, because of the geography, because of the history of these different nations. And this will eventually lead to war.
Yes. And I really have nothing to add to that, because of course you have nailed it. There is in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, there is a breathtaking description when Moses comes up with a big public spectacle for people to remember the laws he's given them. There are two mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And thousands of people will stand on one mountain, then the priests will be in the valley in the middle, and thousands more on the other mountain. And on one mountain, they announce, they express or say amen to the curses if you don't obey the ways of life. And on the other, you say amen to the blessings if you do say the way to life. So what is the way to life, and what is the way to destruction and death? It's very easy. The way to life is what you said. The way to life is tolerance. We live in a big, complex, multicultural world of 8 billion people, with numbers growing by the year. And actually, if there was not to be a war, we could sustain those numbers even with global warming. We could adapt to it if we approach the problems intelligently and positively, as you rightly say. But the key to this is not to fight more wars of ideology or religion, such as those that destroyed Europe during the Reformation from 1500 to about 1650. Europe was destroyed in wars of religion. And finally, in 1648, there was a peace called the Peace of Westphalia, which established the principle of the modern nation state. But it established something much more important. It was that Protestant countries agreed not to crusade against Catholic countries for the sake of it, and Catholic countries agreed to give up their efforts to convert Protestant countries back to Catholicism. And that's what ended the wars of religion in Europe. Is it really so hard for Catholic and Protestant people to live together in peace? Well, in my Northern Ireland, of course, it is impossible, as you'd expect. But everywhere else, all across America and Europe, big deal. Fine, good luck to you. Both ways. Is Christ divided? Well, if he is, you make peace between the divisions. That's what the whole ecumenical movement is about, and God bless it. That's what it's there for. But what is the way of war? The way of war is, our way is the only way to bring eternal world peace. The communists thought this way. The Nazis thought this way. The Islamic fundamentalists think this way. The liberal internationalists in Washington and their followers in London and in other places around the world also think that way. Total free markets, total democracy, but only when they produce the results we want. And when we're free to subvert the results and manipulate those democracies the way they ought to be manipulated, right? All of the above. And of course, unlimited military spending, as you rightly point out. This is the way to perfect world peace and a perfect single global system. And that idiot Francis Fukuyama in 1993 wrote a little book called The End of History. And ironically, it was Brzezinski, of all people, who didn't believe it. I was asked by the Washington Times to ask Brzezinski, and I had excellent relations with him in those days, what the great man's opinion was on this idiot intellectual Fukuyama's argument that the ideological wars of history, all meaningful wars and conflicts in history, had ended with the collapse of communism. That was the thesis. And these people are still framed by that moment. They still believe it to this day. Now, Brzezinski was a Russia-hating racist who continually fed the national interests of the American people and the United States of America to his own hatreds and prejudices and bungles. Mm-hmm. But he got that point right. He said to me, and it was in a phone conversation, I was at my desk in the Washington Times. I said, Professor Brzezinski, is Fukuyama right? Have we reached the end of history? And what did the great man say to me? And he knew how to make a point. He had a great presence to him. Could have been a great stage actor. He could have played the national security advisor in any number of Hollywood movies, right? Much better than actually being it. Martin, after the end of history comes, pause, beat, 1, 2, 3, punchline, more history. After the end of history comes more history. And that's what we've seen since 1993. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing more history. History did not end with the collapse of communism in 1990-91, which means Russia and China are not just going to roll over and die at the next Ukrainian offensive. Just throw away another 250,000 Ukrainian lives and it'll all be over and there'll be happiness forever. That's the kind of thinking they had in World War I. Well, duh. Did it work? Go to the mass graves in Belgium and Central Europe and in Verdun. Look, see for yourselves while you still can. No, it didn't work. And then Woodrow Wilson, the arch idiot, comes along. Self-determination, a typical instant wisdom from the hick American Midwest. You know, one single idea will bring human happiness, whether it's free trade, whether it's speaking Esperanto, whether it's joining the Kiwis or the Kiwanis. You know, it's always something simple and ridiculous and absurd, and it'll solve all the problems of history. Free trade. Yay! Right? And in his case, national self-determination, and his other wonderful idea, the League of Nations, which is today the United Nations. Well, I'd rather have the UN than not have it. It's better to have it. But you've got to be under no illusions about it either. It's only able to do what it's allowed to do, and it isn't allowed to do anything. Do you feel safer? Well, duh.
Well, what is going on with France? It seems like France is lashing out because the former French colonies are trying to reassert themselves as truly independent nations. And it seems like the West, they are giving France a free hand at interfering and intervening in the sovereign affairs of Niger, Mali, Gabon, and all of these other nations. Are we looking at the collapse of French colonialism in the Sahel?
I believe we are. It's certainly under risk. You're absolutely right. And you just used a very important phrase again, and an accurate phrase, Rashid, and that is the collapse of French colonialism, because people might say, but didn't France leave its colonies in the 1950s and early 60s? Well, I see it in your face. Of course, you know the answer. You'll forgive me to spell it out to your audience too. No, it didn't. They pretended to. Same with the British. Neo-colonialism continued. The shameless oppression of the peoples of Africa has continued over the last 80 years. And now the Chinese are moving in. And they'll be doing it for their own interests too, of course. But so far, at least, the Chinese involvement seems to have brought much greater benefits than the British and French and American presence combined. They invest more. They build infrastructure. They don't try to topple governments. They don't try to cause conflicts. They don't try to destroy democratic governments or autocratic ones either. They tend to try and work with whoever is in there constructively. And it's not an ideal approach by any means. It is not going to bring paradise on earth, but it is materially and dramatically improving the standard of living and quality of life and economic prospects for hundreds of millions of human beings who have waited for this for a very long time, for a decent chance to do so. So in the short term, at least, it should be welcomed and has been a hugely positive force for that reason. But as you say, what we see now is a major challenge to the British and the French. And we see, of course, the growth of BRICS. To me, the key factor here so far, there's one big continuing drawback to BRICS, and there is one huge, enormous breakthrough success to them. The breakthrough success that is bigger than anything is the accession of Saudi Arabia to BRICS. Saudi Arabia is only 25 million people, but it is still one of the key swing oil producers on earth. And together with Russia, coordinating with Russia, which they have never done in their history before, they control, and of course you know this backwards already, and I know you are more of an expert on this than I am by far. But, you know, I say it for my own edification and hopefully for the audiences. This is the huge breakthrough. It gives BRICS an economic, financial, energy, clout, weight, and cohesion that it has never had before. What they need to do still, and actually I think the UAE and Saudi Arabia together can give them this, is the development of an international global finance center. Qatar has already been moving strongly in this direction, that can rival and be independent of London and New York. Shanghai has been undermined. Tokyo was contained. Neither of them were allowed by Britain and France and Britain and America and their allies to reach that critical takeoff point where they can be international centers. Another potential center that nobody looks at for international finance is Buenos Aires, and they should. Spanish-speaking world, the immense wealth and resources of South America, the immense, enormously underestimated wealth and resources of Argentina, which is a very vibrantly democratic nation in the best sense when it is not being destabilized by Britain and America. That's worth looking at too. But right now, the place to watch for this and the place for Chinese and Russian protection could be of crucial importance would be Qatar and the UAE as a consequence or spin-off of the Saudi-Russian energy alliance. And that is well worth looking closely at and watching closely.
Don't forget about Iran. Iran was invited into the BRICS also, and it's a major gas and oil player. Absolutely.
Yes.
And also, when we're talking about the BRICS, remember this, that recently, as recent as about a week or two ago, the Chinese were talking about that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization needs to be more in line with the BRICS. And, it's similar to how, and I'm paraphrasing, similar to how the European Union is the political wing of NATO, and so we're looking at a major change, a great paradigm change that is underway from west to east. And this, I think, has the United States, the UK, France, and the European Union in panic, because now there's a challenge to all of the global structures that were set up for Western domination and Western influence and Western wealth. I do believe that this has caused panic in the halls of Brussels, London, Berlin, Paris, and Washington, D.C. And this is one of the things that is pushing their irrational, illogical policies to sanction and wage war, because they see now an up-and-coming challenger to the throne. And they've ruled so long that they don't want to sit down and watch somebody else take the position that they've had for so long. What say you on this as we bring the show to a close?
Again, please have me on again. I don't have to do any thinking. You do it all for me. And then you make me look good. You make me look better than I have been. Because you brought up an aspect I did not think on before, but is very profound and important. And it is the chain reaction effects of incompetence. The great historian Corelli Barnett, who I mentioned before, again, Margaret Thatcher's favorite historian, he was the only British historian in her 11 years in power she put into the House of Lords. She gave the highest academic honor she could to. And he talks about British strategy and, German strategy in World War II. And he makes the point that when countries are losing wars, their strategies unravel. And Sun Tzu goes further, of course. Sun Tzu says strategy is crucial. You have to know what your goals are. You have to know how you're planning to achieve those goals. And then it doesn't matter if you lose 100 battles, but if you keep the goal in mind, you'll get there. Right. Whereas you can win 1,000 battles like the Germans in both world wars, or Hannibal against the Romans, who never beat him in battle. And you'll still lose the war and lose big if you don't have a strategy, you don't know what you're doing. These people don't know what they're doing. Their strategy was just a fiction of their imagination. So what happens when reality actually starts to intrude? Exactly what you just said. There is panic. And there is chain reaction of incompetence. The dominoes start to fall against each other. One bad strategy knocks over another bad strategy, and then it knocks over a third bad strategy, and they don't know what to do next. They don't know. They themselves, as you said, created the economic conditions whereby the whole world lost confidence in them and won't invest in them anymore. The consequence of this is the new age of the super BRICS, augmented by Saudi Arabia and Iran, not small augmentations, to put it mildly, and Egypt, which gives an awful lot of trained and hardworking manpower and security stability throughout the Middle East at the same time. And this is taken from the American-Israeli bloc and the West's bloc, and it is now going to the Russia-China bloc. And so is Turkey, which is even technically in NATO and the EU, though both of them have treated it like dirt repeatedly over the last 20 years, because they do not respect President Erdogan or realize what he is doing for his people. And because, again, and even in Europe, you see this with Viktor Orbán. He's a racist. He's an ugly little fellow, but he doesn't drink the Kool-Aid. He doesn't drink the Kool-Aid, right? And so you have, the more these anomalies keep popping up, the more these giant weeds start popping up in Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken's and Victoria Nuland's garden. And the more they don't know what to do, the more they flail around, and the more they overcompensate by thinking, if we gamble and win big in Ukraine, this is the mark of the very bad poker player. I guarantee none of these people has ever played serious poker. Presidents Eisenhower, Truman, Kennedy, FDR himself, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and laid back kindly Ronald Reagan were all ferociously good poker players. Eisenhower gave up playing poker when he was in the army because he was winning too much money and making too many enemies of important generals who he was beating. And Eisenhower, who was no fool when it came to interpersonal relations, changed to bridge, where people, it wasn't so humiliating when you lost, right? Mm-hmm. But poker is the great game for reading human character. And what does the loser do when he's sinking and in poker? The wise man, and I was always wise enough to do this, I was never a great player, but I was smart enough to know when I was supposed to be the rube at the table and cut my losses and run for my life and live to play another day, right? Believe me, when you grow up on the streets of North Belfast, even if you're supposed to be a Brit, you learn to run fast to save your ass, your anatomy, right? I mean, forget Bed-Stuy or Harlem. Let me tell you some stories of the Shankill Road and the Crumlin Road from North Belfast from the times I was growing up there, right? All of this. Now, when you play poker in such circles, you learn when to swallow your pride and cut your losses and run away. It's central to the game. These people have never played the game. They're little kiddies. They're the rubes who think they're the geniuses. Yeah, they're the rubes who think they're the geniuses. You know, they're like John Bolton was when he takes that line from the great musical Hamilton. You know, were you in the room? You know, the room where it happened, right? Mm-hmm. John Bolton was never in the room where it happened. He was always in the room where it didn't happen, and he never realized it. That's where the United States of America is today. That's where Jake Sullivan is, and Victoria Nuland are, and Anthony Blinken. They think the whole universe still revolves around them, and it's ignoring them. It's run by them. They are in the room where nothing ever happened. It isn't going to. Yeah. And the other thing is, because they never played poker, all they can do in Ukraine is it's the one game they've got going. They're losing big. They need to cut their losses, and they certainly need to cut the shameful losses they've inflicted on the Ukrainian people. And they haven't the guts to do it, and they haven't the intellect to do it, and they haven't the vision to do it. And they've never played poker, so they don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. Poker is essential. The study of poker is essential to the study of understanding how the United States became the prominent power in the world from 1865 to 1945. Every major American Secretary of State, President, and major international negotiator, with the exception of that strange creature, Theodore Roosevelt, were all superlative poker players. Nobody plays it today anymore. They're all intellectuals. They're all geniuses. They all Paul Wolfowitz's feet. They all write articles for the Yale International Review, which Sullivan, God help us, edited. The law review there, or the Oxford International Review. How standards have collapsed in Oxford since my day. He edited that too. Right? They haven't a clue. But American foreign policy makers are now in the room where it didn't happen. And it isn't going to happen. And that is the lesson of the new expanded BRICS. The world is expanding. America is being left in the cold. America is not being isolated. She has isolated herself. And none of them has the guts to wake up to the reality of the situation.
And I look, as we close out, I look and I see she's losing out in her so-called own backyard in South and Central America and the Caribbean.
Yes.
She's losing in Asia. She's losing in Eurasia. And Richard Nixon said something that was very poignant that reflects to today when he talks about the situation in North Africa and the Middle East. And he said, if we lose Egypt, we've lost the region. We see that Egypt is aligning itself with the BRICS, and we see that Egypt is trying to become a Shanghai Cooperation Organization member. So that means that the U.S. and the Western world has lost all the way around. We're looking at a new paradigm. What say you in closing?
Again, you're going to be a very busy man. Not only do you have to be National Security Advisor, you have to be Assistant Secretary of State for Middle East and Near East Affairs as well, because there's no one else to do the job. I mean, go for it, man. Who else have we got? My God, exactly. Yeah.
We got to bring you back. We got to bring you back on.
It is a joy, Rashid. Where have you been all my life, man?
Hey, thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us on the platform, man. I really appreciate it.
Again, hopefully, please, sooner rather than later.
Yes, soon.
Anytime.
All right, and be blessed. I'll talk to you. I'll hit you up later. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you so much.
Rashid, I'm the one to thank you. Thank you, man.
All right, be blessed. Everybody, you have just witnessed, I think, which was one of the great interviews. I really enjoy the conversation. I'm thankful that that we're growing, but I want to say something to you all. Do good. Don't do good just to be seen doing good. Do good because it's the right thing to do. Even when nobody else is watching you, remember that the living God is watching you. And that matters more than anything else. And so in closing, I hope that you have gotten a equal or greater value to the time that you spent with us, because that's why you say spending time. Time is a non-renewable resource. You have to make sure that you are very particular in spending your time, because you can never get it back. And so I hope that this show has given you an equal or greater payout for you spending your time with us. On that note, I go out the same way that I always come in, with love in my heart for you if you love truth. But know this, that the true and living God, he will always love you better than I could ever love you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous, because righteousness is the only thing that'll get you out of here. And mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces.